Foxtrot X-ray 22 in the Broadway area. Tom, looks like Hugh's approaching weapons height now.
This government will never surrender to the IRA, never!
These people will never win. Democracy will triumph over evil.
In the quiet lanes of East Tyrone, the most experienced unit the IRA had ever assembled made its way to the village of Loughgall. The attack was to change the face of the 30-year conflict. The target was the police station. But British intelligence knew the IRA was coming and the SAS was lying in wait. Special branch officers in uniform acted as decoys.
Just as darkness approached, we entered the station, along with our army colleagues.
The SAS?
The SAS, yes. And we set up base at the station.
Undercover soldiers monitored the approaches.
We've located a van, and in front of it there was this JCB type vehicle, and it suddenly became very obvious that this was the team on the way to Loughgall.
A 200-pound bomb was in the bucket of the digger.
Next minute the JCB stopped directly outside the window I was at.
Right outside the window?
Right outside the window. And the stage just ran to the rear of the station.
What do you hear?
There's an explosion, and almost at the same time you can hear automatic gunfire. A lot of gunfire, which went on for a long time. It seemed a long time.
I took cover, and then in seconds a massive explosion. I found myself buried at the corner of the station, in rubble, inhaling dust and in darkness.
Did you think you were going to survive?
No. At that stage, I thought, I'm dead. Simple as that. I thought I was dead.
Outside the station, the SAS opened up and cut the 8-man IRA unit to pieces. It was the IRA's heaviest loss in modern times.
And when you heard that there were 8 IRA men dead?
I think that we could say that we were jubilant. I was amazed that 8 had actually been killed. But yeah, we were happy. We thought it was a job well done.
My personal first reaction was really one of some satisfaction that we had won one, as it were, in this continual conflict, that it was a victory for the forces of law and order.
The weapons recovered after the ambush were linked to 8 killings. Gerry Adams threatened that Loughgall would become a tombstone for British policy in Ireland. This series looks at how the British state, the Brits, fought the IRA for almost 30 years and finally helped bring them to the negotiating table. What message did Loughgall and similar incidents send to the IRA?
I hope it sent a message that the British government was resolute and was going to fight them.
Today, as soldiers patrol the still hostile streets of Crossmaglen, you might not think that the IRA's guns have been silent for almost 3 years, even in this untamed land of South Armagh. Peace looks different here. The conflict is not yet over. Few would have dreamt that when British troops intervened in 1969, they would still be on the streets 30 years on. They came to protect the Catholic minority from loyalist attack.
When I first went there, I had considerable sympathy for them. In fact, if one took sides, which of course one didn't, but one's sympathies were certainly with the Catholic or nationalist population, because I personally think they'd had a pretty raw deal.
There was a fear that you were going into an unknown mire, that you didn't know what was there, you didn't know what were going to happen to you when you were there, and how you got out of the other side of the bog. So that feeling was there. But I think people were persuaded something had to be done.
There you are, love. That's for after your lunch or after your dinner.
Thank you very much.
We were treated as saviours, that's all I can say. You know, we went in there and they were very nice to us and very thankful.
How long did you think you'd be there for?
Well, I thought that was it, you know, clean the mess up, let people rebuild their buildings and get out of it, you know, but as quick as that. We didn't realise we were going to be there for 30 odd years.
Few imagined then that over 1,000 soldiers and policemen would die.
Did you lack knowledge of Ireland?
Oh yes, I don't know anybody who knew a great deal about Ireland.
The honeymoon with some sections of the Catholic population lasted barely a year. By the beginning of 1971, it looked like divorce. The turnaround happened when the army was ordered to search nationalist areas for the IRA's weapons. The IRA, which was almost extinct when the troops came in, gained a new lease of life, regenerated by the army's actions. Did you feel the hatred?
Yeah. Yeah, God, yeah, you could feel it. It was like an animal. The whole area was like a something from hell, I suppose, really.
By that summer, the IRA had not only blitzed Belfast, but killed 14 soldiers and policemen. Sectarian tensions tore communities apart. Reluctantly, the government agreed to internment without trial.
It was thought that there were several hundred villains who were responsible for most of the mayhem which was going on, the shooting and the bombings and so on, and if these could be picked up and put out of circulation, peace could be restored.
Nationalist areas erupted as 3,000 troops poured in to take away their fathers and sons. Whole communities were uprooted.
As we flew over Belfast, it seemed to me whole streets were burning. You could see roads that obviously had been blocked and were barricaded. You could see fires from bonfires, from ruined cars and burning houses.
And how did that strike you?
Pretty amazing, really. Something that I'd never seen before. I was only 19. And it was a sort of realisation that this was happening in a city of the United Kingdom.
Over 300 Catholics and not one Protestant were lifted. Many were totally innocent. Intelligence was poor. The IRA had known that internment was coming, and its men were not at home.
All as far as I'm concerned it did was turn a larger number of the nationalist population, who at that time had been firmly on our side and very sensibly on our side, against us. And to my simple mind as a regimental soldier, it was lunacy.
Wasn't internment a disaster?
Oh, far from it. A number of those who were taken, and not by any means the most junior in the ranks of the IRA, were described by those who were carrying out interrogation as singing like canaries.
The Canaries were a dozen key IRA suspects identified by British intelligence. Whilst most internees were herded into special camps, the dozen were singled out for special in-depth interrogation. It was MI5's idea. The IRA suspects were hooded, made to stand against a wall, and subjected to what became known as the 5 techniques. Liam Shannon was one of the hooded men.
I continually tried to pull the bag off, but it was tied so tightly around my throat and onto the epaulets it was impossible to get off.
The IRA call themselves soldiers. They say they're carrying warfare and so on. They must be prepared to be frightened if they're captured under interrogation and so on.
So that began what was called the 5 techniques for me. It was sensory deprivation, wall standing, restricted diet, and white noise, as they called it, white noise.
What was white noise?
White noise I can only describe to be like compressed air or steam hissing from a pipe. The degree varied from time to time. Sometimes it was soft, sometimes it got very loud, almost ear-piercing.
Is it all right to put a bag over somebody's head, stand them against a wall, subject them to high-pitched, constant noise?
Well, you see, that you come to a limit to whatever you're going to do. I would have thought that type of activity has overstepped the limit.
In an unprecedented case, the Irish government took the British to the European Court of Human Rights. Embarrassingly, Britain was found guilty of inhuman and degrading treatment. Shannon received £25,000 in compensation.
If by standing someone up against a wall, depriving him of sleep, playing white sound to him, whatever, you can actually get information from him which is going to save lives, then some people would argue that you should do that. And I think this argument shouldn't be too lightly dismissed.
These techniques may have saved some lives, but after internment the death toll still soared. In the 6 months before, the IRA killed 10 soldiers. In the 6 months after, it killed 40. Army commanders had little doubt what to do to respond to the IRA's increasingly bloody campaign. What was your mission statement?
I had a very simple mission statement from 39 Brigade. That was to destroy the IRA in my area, which was, as a battalion commander, that was meat and drink to me, and that's what we got on to do.
What did destroying the IRA mean?
Well, it means capturing or killing everybody who was killing and maiming innocent people in my area.
Snipers accounted for most of the army's dead. Soldiers often faced an unseen enemy fighting on home ground. What did you call the area? What was it known as?
The reservation, yeah. The reservation. And
because?
Well, it was Indian country, wasn't it?
Soldiers knew what would happen if captured by the enemy. The IRA was ruthless, not bound by any law. An Army Community Relations officer wearing civvies ran into a roadblock manned by Republicans on the Falls Road. He was dragged away and interrogated by a man in a mask.
And he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm a British soldier." And he said, "Well, you're going to be a dead British soldier." And got me up, put a hood on my head, and frog marched me out. The next thing I knew, I'm flung into the air, and I land down on my knees. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, I've got a hood on my head. I don't know, I've got no orientation whatsoever what's happening. I then heard the cocking of the pistol, my pistol probably. And I had the good sense to count about 3 while I was taking aim and move. And by moving, I think that saved my life, because all the bullets I received, 5 of them, were in my right leg. And I then pretended to be dead.
Did they think they'd killed you?
I'm sure they did, because they didn't follow it up with anything. Then they all ran away. I could hear people running away.
The soldier's job had been to improve community relations, but most of his comrades in hard Republican areas saw this as a lost cause. Surrounded by an invisible enemy, their priority was survival, not winning hearts and minds.
If we caught them with a rifle, we'd give them a good hiding, basically. Oh yeah, you know, it did happen, because they were going to kill us, and basically it was the law of the jungle. And I remember what I said about that area, it was a jungle.
What was a good hiding?
Well, a good thumping, basically, you know.
That wouldn't endear you to the local population?
It didn't need endearing to that lot, mate. There was no nice people in that area.
Well, I know there was a degree of rough handling of certain people. But then one's got to say that those sort of people were members of the IRA. And we knew, although in many cases we couldn't prove it, that they had shot at soldiers. They had thrown pipe bombs at soldiers. They had thrown petrol bombs at soldiers. They had caused deaths and injuries to soldiers. So it was perfectly understandable that there was some very rough handling of some very rough people.
What form did the rough handling of the rough people take?
I think physical manhandling, but really not very much more than that.
Given a hard time?
Given a hard time.
Guns put to their head?
Not that I know of.
Crawling over glass?
Not that I know of.
These things happened, didn't they?
They might well have.
By the beginning of 1972, the IRA was well entrenched and convinced it was winning the war. The army became trapped in a vicious circle. The greater the IRA atrocity, the heavier the military response.
I think probably the way we conducted our operations those days certainly encouraged those who wouldn't previously have committed themselves to support the IRA, and indeed would have in fact strengthened the way It would have strengthened the support that the IRA got in the local communities, certainly.
Well, there was in our area the tallest factory chimney, I suspect, in Northern Ireland. It was a very, very tall chimney indeed. And so that we could make sure that the locals were aware of what was going on in their area, we got hold of the highest ladder in that you could get, or construction in Northern Ireland. One of those gantries that put television cameras up to very high heights. And first of all, of course, we stenciled our back badge at the top, and then put the scoreboard on it. For instance, Gloucester's 2, IRA 0. And that used to gradually come down so that we could keep them up to date on what was going on. And many, many, many were the requests. We used to have to get this thing taken down, but sadly, when we got these requests, the gantry was unavailable.
No single incident did more to alienate nationalists from the army than what happened one Sunday. Rioters broke away from a peaceful anti-internment march, but the army had a plan. A battalion of paratroopers had been brought in from Belfast to scoop up the troublemakers. As they pursued them, the soldiers said they came under fire from IRA snipers. They fired back, claiming their targets were gunmen and bombers. 14 civilians were shot dead. None was believed to be armed, none believed to be a member of the IRA. The day became known as Bloody Sunday.
Certainly, I think, with the outcry of Bloody Sunday, with the deaths of so many civilians, and the international storm of protest that caused, we realised that I think a solution by military means alone that was no longer possible, even if it was desirable in the first instance.
Nationalists believe the army had gunned down the innocent in cold blood. The IRA never looked back. With the military option now closed, the government had to pursue other avenues to try and end the bloodshed. In the wake of Bloody Sunday, there were the beginnings of a dramatic shift in security policy that was to have a profound impact on the conduct of the rest of the campaign. With an overt military solution now out of the question, army chiefs devised other means of countering an increasingly sophisticated and formidable enemy. Plans were laid for a range of covert undercover operations that were to play such a critical role in the years ahead. In the shadows, the secret war began. The army knew from its vast experience in colonial fields that intelligence was the key. The first weapon in the secret war was a dozen IRA men who had been persuaded to change sides. Once recruited, they toured IRA strongholds, fingering their comrades from the security of a military vehicle. They became the eyes and ears of a new covert army unit, the Military Reconnaissance Force. To Republicans, the MRF, following a series of controversial shootings, was a secret unit with a license to kill.
There was a curious atmosphere prevailing at the time, which we have subsequently described as a slightly piratical atmosphere, and I think that that's not a bad description, actually.
Piratical.
Piratical. I mean, there were gaps to be filled, and there was no point in sitting back in an ivory tower of any sort and not doing something about it.
Allen joined the MRF in 1972. The identities of undercover agents in this series are not revealed to protect their personal security. What did you understand you were being recruited for and to do?
I understood that the organisation was a plain-clothed military unit, which took a rather more robust view of counter-terrorist operations.
What would that rather more robust view entail?
Actively seeking out the enemy to do something that was positive to sort the terrorists out once and for all.
The most novel application of these early piratical ventures was a special laundry service run by the army. The van that became a familiar sight in Republican areas was used to spy on the enemy. The enterprise was known as the Foursquare Laundry. How did the laundry operate?
Well, they operated from a van and collected laundry from certain estates, advertised their wares, as it were, and collected laundry, which was then, I presume, checked over for explosives and forensically, and then cleaned and returned.
The Foursquare Laundry was one means of going in to get information about who was doing what in areas without them knowing we were observing it.
The laundry's cover was finally blown when the IRA interrogated one of its members it suspected of working for the Brits. He spilled the beans, and the IRA planned its attack. It was carried out by gunmen from the unit commanded by Brendan Hughes, known as Darky. How was the Foursquare laundry attacked?
Two men get out of the car. A car was parked waiting on the van to come. The driver was there, and the driver was shot. And the woman who was collecting the laundry around the doors ran into the house, and the people in the house, believing that the van was being attacked by loyalists, helped the woman get away, the undercover agent get away.
It was an attempt which partly worked and partly failed, with disastrous consequences, which we all know. But I suspect in the way of these things, it's rather like sort of, the first parachute. Somebody's got to have the notion of a parachute, jump out of an aeroplane and be killed before somebody says, well, I think we've got to design a better parachute.
To me, it was a very, very amateurish and very badly run military operation.
That incident presaged a change in the way the MRF took part. I think the army authorities were not very happy about that at all, and things changed after that.
By 1973, the army had set up a new secret unit designed to cause the IRA maximum damage with minimum risk. It became known as 14 Intelligence Company, or the Det. Its operators blended into the landscape in Republican areas, breathing the same air as the enemy. It was up close and personal.
They really did have to have nerves of steel. I mean, as an Englishman or a Scotsman, where your accent would give you away instantly on the streets, so to go in and actually buy packets of cigarettes over the counter in a known Republican shop so that you can see who is in there and eyeball them takes a lot of doing, and there were a lot of people who did that sort of thing. Very brave.
What did you look like in those days?
We wore our hair long. We wore scruffy clothes. We certainly didn't look like British soldiers.
Jim became one of the Det's first operators. He served through 2 decades. But what about the accent? That's a dead giveaway, isn't it?
Absolutely. We didn't say anything to anybody. And when we did, we spoke in grunts and groans. And but there was times when, okay, maybe you had to put on a bit of an Irish accent.
They were often operating individually in potentially extremely dangerous and hostile areas. So an enormously brave organisation who've contributed to the conduct of the campaign, well out of proportion to their relatively small size.
Given the knife-edge danger involved, operators are trained to resist an IRA interrogation if caught. It's brutal and realistic, and women aren't excluded. Anna became one of the Det's few female operators. For her, the training was a nightmare.
A bag was put over my head, and then I was thrown onto a concrete floor in a very cold location. I was hosed down in cold water, and clothes were taken off me. During this was happening, obviously the bag was still over my head, I couldn't see what was happening. I was kicked, punched, I was being abused by male and female people who I'd obviously didn't recognise the voices.
Abused?
Physical abuse about obviously the state I was in, the fact that they abused, obviously when my clothes came off my body, very sarcastic about how you appeared.
You were stripped?
Stripped, and overalls were put on. And then, again, you were wet through again, cold water, and you were sat down, and it was very quiet for a long time.
Did you crack?
I did at the end. Told them my correct name. I just wanted to get out of there. I was just at my limits of endurance. It just got to a point where you just don't care if you live or die, really.
What was the failure rate?
Well, I know out of 1,000 applicants in the beginning, 17 of us actually went to Northern Ireland.
Female operators were a special asset.
A woman can get away with so much, it's unbelievable. We would walk around, and I've stood next to the main players in a town in Tyrone, and I've listened to them. I've stood there with my shopping bag, as did the other women, and we've listened to them, we've walked past them, and they've never batted an eye. They'd never realised that they were so sort of close to a surveillance operator. We also, with the flexibility of a man and a woman in the car, it seems such the most natural thing in the world, especially at night time. You were the courting couple. If it ever came to something a bit compromising, then you just got in a bit of a clinch and pretended you were snogging, and often it diffused the situation.
The det was specially trained in methods of entry. Did you break into IRA men's houses?
Yes, I did. And if there was a weapon hide to be looked at, then yes, we were trained to get in and do it.
Trained to break into houses?
Yes.
Did that strike you as strange, that you were being taught how to break and enter?
Not at all. I'd seen that the situation in Northern Ireland was quite desperate, and desperate measures were needed.
Two of the det's earliest targets were Gerry Adams and Brendan Hughes, believed to be top IRA leaders in Belfast. The net closed in.
There'd been a major operation going on for some time directly against the Belfast Brigade staff, and it was decided at a very high level that the brigade staff would be taken out and interned.
The house was in front of the Falls Road, right, so I'd noticed a car passing. I'd then seen the car again, sitting on the other side of the Falls Road, directly facing the house.
I was sitting in my car. To all intents and purposes, I was an insurance salesman, and my role really was to trigger the arrest operation. Once all the members of brigade staff were inside the meeting house, most of them had gone in. Gerry Adams arrived. He sat on my car bonnet.
What, while you're sitting there?
While I'm sitting in it. Gave a wave back. And immediately that gave me a cover.
And how do you feel when Mr. Adams comes and sits on your bonnet?
Nervous. Very nervous. And then he went into the house.
2 or 3 minutes later, the house that I was in was totally surrounded.
Who do you think the people in the car were?
I have no doubt they were British undercover intelligence officers. I have no doubt about it.
Adams and Hughes were arrested and imprisoned. It was the det's first coup.
I think 14 Intelligence Company were actually pivotal, and I think that they will prove to have been, one of the most significant weapons in the battle against that kind of urban terrorism.
When operators went out, there was no guarantee they'd ever come back.
I was out on a patrol. We were monitoring terrorist activity one day. I think it was a Saturday afternoon, and one of my team members was shot. He'd probably gone round too many times around a certain area, and he'd been rumbled, and they shot him. Fortunately, he wasn't killed.
A tape recorder was found in the car. It had recorded the movements of suspects under surveillance. Sinn Féin had a field day.
5 to 3. McNeely, McManus, wrong. The old X-ray 1 and X-ray 28 came from Broadway area.
But the dets were not the only lives on the line. They worked hand in hand with the RUC's special branch, who provided vital intelligence from a network of informers, the state's most deadly weapon. Mike became one of Special Branch's most effective agent handlers. Recruiting them required nerve, courage, and cheek.
There's no use lying and saying you're a travelling salesman who can make them a lot of money selling blinds. So you have to be basically upfront about it, and you have to tell them who you are, what you are, and that they may be able to help you. There are many reasons for people to offer information. Some of them are related to money, some of them are related to motive, maybe a grudge against some particular person or organisation. Perhaps a feeling that what was being done wasn't quite right, and they would dispute the tactics of the particular organisation. I know that's a fact on many occasions.
Some people can be open to pressure, to threats, to financial rewards. There is always that. There's always that danger, no matter what organisation. There's always the danger of people being turned.
Like their det counterparts, Special Branch handlers have to live on their nerves and survive on the streets. Mike lived to tell the tale. His partner did not.
He was working on the Falls Road. We had some intelligence about an operation. He and some other colleagues were following that up. As he got to the junction of Clonard Street, somebody walked across the pedestrian crossing. He braked. Somebody walked up to the passenger window and fired shots through the window and killed him.
Were you close to him?
On a personal basis, very close, yeah. I was devastated, as was everybody else involved in the operation. But that's the risk we ran, all of us.
It was a deadly game of cat and mouse. By the beginning of 1974, the IRA was convinced it had the upper hand. It had pulled off an astonishing coup, masterminded from this house in Myrtlefield Park. The IRA had moved upmarket. Inside, Brendan Hughes, who by now had escaped from prison, was bugging Army headquarters, thanks to a friendly telephone engineer. Whilst putting in a backup telephone system for the Army, he was tapping military intelligence for the IRA.
He was able to put this device onto lines coming into Lisburn Army headquarters. And it was a simple tape. The calls would have come in, information would have come in, and every few days these tapes would be delivered to a house in Myrtlefield Park.
There was, however, a snag. The tapes of conversations between various Army intelligence officers were unintelligible. They'd been scrambled. Again, the resourceful engineer was asked to help.
You couldn't understand. It was like Mickey Mouse type dialogue. And we found out that the only place we could get this was an anti-scrambler device. And there was one in Lisburn Army headquarters. This was stolen out of Army headquarters and brought to Myrtlefield Park.
By the same person?
By the same person.
Special Branch was finally tipped off about the bugging by an informer. Now they turned the tables. Undercover police officers prepared to move in whilst the Det staked out the house.
On the night of the lift, when we had the Army and the RUC go into the place, we had a man in one of the bushes in the garden.
In the garden?
Yes, in a rhododendron bush, camouflaged out.
Wasn't that a bit obvious in the front garden?
He got away with it. Nobody knew. The only problem was he'd been there for 24 hours with only a Mars bar, and he was an extremely hungry person. And we tried to resupply him with some fish and chips. Unfortunately, the fish and chips got thrown into the wrong bush.
They came in, and I was immediately put against the wall and searched. I obviously protested my innocence and indignation that this was happening at my house. And there was a plainclothes Special Branch man actually said to me, "Come on, Dark, you got a long enough run." So I knew the game was up then. So.
What did you say to Brendan Hughes when you knocked on the door?
Well, he was complaining, and I thought I made some comment to him, yeah, that he had a fair run, and he shouldn't be complaining too much about his arrest.
To Paul, the arrest of Hughes was one of the highlights of his long career as an undercover Special Branch officer. What did Mr. Hughes say to you?
Oh, interesting. He said, "I'm sure you're not going to tell me how you did this operation, but congratulations. It's a good operation."
Had they swooped 5 minutes later, they would have netted the engineer. He'd stopped off en route for a sandwich. The media was never informed about the bugging. This is the first time the story's been told. Did you ever try to recruit Brendan Hughes?
I did.
And what did Mr. Hughes say when you tried to recruit him?
Absolutely nothing.
What did you say to him?
I thought, well, I explained to him that he could help us, and in his position, he was in a great position to help us and to put an end to what was going on, but I fell on stony ground.
Money was offered, yeah, a suitcase full of money I could have if I turned. And obviously I just brushed it off. He wasn't listening to it. Yeah, but of course he did, yeah.
What did the policeman say to you?
That I could have a suitcase full of money if I turned. If I turned.
Did you say how big was the suitcase?
No, I never said a word. I never even answered. I never took it on to be noticed.
By 1974, most IRA leaders were behind the wires of the Long Kesh prison camp. The Det and Special Branch had no doubt they were on top. Many operations carried out by the IRA outside were being compromised. The Brits felt they were winning. What was the state of the IRA in 1974?
They were on the knees.
Could the IRA have been beaten then?
Yes.
I think the IRA was under severe pressure. I think for the first time from the early 1970, the British military machine was actually working, and the IRA was under severe pressure.
Without putting too fine a point on it, we had them by the short and curlies, and if another 4 months, if we'd been allowed to get on with it, we would have totally eliminated them, as the Army would have eliminated the whole of the IRA, as it was well on the way, frankly, to doing so.
I am convinced that we could have changed the course of history had the political will remained there.
In an urban terrorist situation, such as exists in Belfast today, the observation post, by giving advance warning of a situation before it develops, enables the security forces to dominate the terrorists.
But victory eluded the Brits for political reasons. To inflict a military defeat on the IRA would have required measures inappropriate in a liberal democracy. A more subtle approach had to be found.
You've got, in the end, to find some way of stopping terrorism. We are a democracy. We can't go around shooting everybody we think is a terrorist, I mean, which is certainly one possible way of doing it. But, I mean, nobody in this country would have stood for that. And we are a parliamentary democracy, and we did behave throughout as a parliamentary democracy, which is a very, very important point. But if the political situation made it possible, one should never discount the need to have a dialogue, although one should be extremely careful and extremely clear about what you were trying to do if you did enter a dialogue.
In 1974, MI6 learned that some members of the IRA's Army Council might be interested in talking. In the utmost secrecy, the government put out tentative feelers. The emissary was the MI6 officer stationed in the province, Michael Oatley. This is the first time he's talked publicly about his role. By the beginning of that year, over 200 soldiers had been killed.
I was very conscious of the attrition rate against the British Army. I remember one day picking up a copy of the Observer colour supplement, which had a 2-page spread, I think it was the Observer, of passport photos, or perhaps slightly smaller, to get them all on the 2 pages of all the soldiers who had been shot, perhaps in the previous 12 months or perhaps longer, and thinking that if I was going to spend 2 years or longer in Northern Ireland, I ought perhaps to try to concentrate on seeing whether my particular skills and background could enable me to find a way to influence the leadership of the IRA, or to make some kind of contact through which they could be influenced. I found by spending time in Republican areas what was to me quite a surprise, that the quality of the young people joining the IRA was very impressive. I mean, you could go to a street in the Cregan and find that everybody's favourite son had joined the IRA, and however much their mothers might disapprove of what they were doing or be frightened by it, that was what happened.
Oatley's link through to the IRA was via a secret contact in Derry who acted as an intermediary with the Army Council. The communication was highly sensitive.
I had established what you might think of as a hollow bamboo pipe between me and somebody significant on the Republican side, down which nothing was being said, but that if one sort of blew down it gently, the person at the end could feel the pressure and blow back. So I went to my boss, in effect Sir Frank Cooper, and said, look, I've done this. I haven't really stepped very far out of line. I've got this bamboo pipe. I haven't said anything down it, but I know that if I do say anything down it, it'll be heard. And in any case, it's quite a nice pipe. Can we perhaps put a bit of material down it to see if we can develop a relationship? Anyway, the net result of this was that over the next...
What did Sir Frank say?
You'd have to ask Sir Frank what his position was.
Well, my own view is that if you're dealing with a terrorist organisation, at some remove, you always ought to have a dialogue going with any terrorist organisation. Because, I mean, the basic problem about terrorism is it's very difficult to snuff out.
Although the messages indicated the IRA was interested in peace, it escalated its campaign, slaughtering 21 civilians in Birmingham pubs. But despite the atrocity, Oatley persevered. Finally, at the beginning of 1975, the IRA declared an extended ceasefire, and serious negotiations began. Astonishingly, the British put structures of disengagement on the agenda.
When asked what I was prepared to discuss, I said, I'm prepared to discuss anything you like.
Including structures of withdrawal from Ireland.
Whatever that may mean.
To the IRA, structures of disengagement meant British withdrawal from Northern Ireland. Structures of disengagement, I assume, meant something different to the British. You weren't talking about withdrawal from Northern Ireland. By structures of disengagement, you meant what?
We meant, without any dispute, a disengagement of the army and the thinning down of the army. That's what we meant by disengagement.
But the phrase structures of disengagement from Ireland or withdrawal from Ireland is neatly ambiguous, isn't it? It can mean one thing to them and something entirely different to you.
Well, I think that was the nature of our dialogue. And I think that the ambiguity was recognised by both sides so that each could make what it wanted from it.
By the end of 1975, the ceasefire was over. The IRA felt they'd been conned. The government, they concluded, had no intention of making a political withdrawal. The Brits had put great pressure on the IRA, but not enough to make it give in or compromise. The future looked bleak, and it wasn't lost on an IRA man captured by his enemy. The long war loomed.
He said to me, "Why?" He said, "One day you're going to lose this." He said, "We'll keep fighting as long as it takes." He said, "Because one day you're going to get a government," and these are the words he said, "You're going to get a government one day that are going to be soft enough to give us what we want, as long as we keep going." It's come true, isn't it?
Looks like Hugh's approaching weapon sight now.
This government will never surrender to the IRA, never.
These people will never win. Democracy will triumph over evil.
In the shadows, the British state, the Brits, prepared to take the war to the IRA. The ground was laid by 14 Intelligence Company, the Det, the Army's most secret surveillance unit. The new offensive gave rise to allegations that the Brits had a policy of shoot to kill, fueled by a series of bloody confrontations. In one incident, the Det were monitoring IRA weapons in a field. When it was known the IRA was coming, the Det and the SAS made ready.
Myself and my partner drove out 2 members of the SAS and we dropped them off near to where the weapons were hidden. There wasn't a gung-ho attitude. The SAS were there primarily to arrest them and recover the weapons.
Such operations were meticulously planned. Only when the intelligence was confirmed would the go-ahead be given. Lives were on the line.
What did you hear?
What we heard over our radio net, there was the words contact, contact, which obviously meant an engagement was occurring. There was also the sound of gunfire.
And what happened to the 2 IRA men?
They were killed. Weapons were recovered from them.
Was a warning given?
I was told a warning was shouted to them, yes.
Who told you?
That was from the SAS.
Did you believe them?
I did.
Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness presided at the funeral of the 2 dead IRA men, known to be Brian Campbell and Con McGurr. They were buried with full IRA honours. The IRA alleged the SAS had given no warning, no chance to surrender. Republicans accused the SAS of murder, their central charge against the British state. I was here in South Armagh at the beginning of 1976, reporting a series of horrendous tit-for-tat sectarian killings. And I vividly remember wondering whether indeed the province was on the brink of civil war. You could see the fear in people's faces, and you could almost taste it in the air. Since the early 70s, I'd watched successive governments try to end the bloodshed with a variety of political solutions, and by even talking directly to the IRA. But all these attempts had failed. By 1976, it was clear that politics had reached a dead end, and that the IRA was determined to carry on killing. It wasn't therefore surprising that the government made security its #1 priority, and the SAS was the cutting edge.
The SAS ought to give it its proper title, the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, one of the smallest and certainly the most secret fighting force in the world that taught to kill, maim, damage and destroy here in the somewhat mundane surroundings of Herefordshire.
The SAS was no stranger to Northern Ireland, as over the years members had served there giving advice to other regiments. But now the SAS was to be deployed officially to take on the IRA in South Armagh.
Certainly when they were first deployed, there was the IRA fear that there was an SAS trooper hiding under every bush. And so as a result of that, the IRA became very much more circumspect.
I think there was a fear that this rather mysterious body called the SAS, which most people didn't in fact know very much about, if it were deployed in Northern Ireland, it might act in some rather ruthless way and perhaps lead to criticism. On the other hand, there was the argument that the SAS was a very professional body of men. If deployed, it could probably do some military tasks better than anybody else. Therefore, why not deploy it?
But before that arm was triggered, other agencies had to provide the vital intelligence. RUC Special Branch recruited informers. MI5 planted listening devices in IRA houses and hides. And undercover soldiers, the Det, bugged IRA weapons and tracked their men on the ground.
I wanted to be in there. I wanted to be at the forefront. I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to make a contribution, I suppose. At least do a professional job, work with professional people, not just wander around aimlessly, wandering around the countryside, you know, talking to the locals, presenting yourself as a target occasionally.
Frank did several tours with the Det in the 70s and 80s. We haven't identified undercover soldiers for reasons of personal security.
This unit obviously was a very professional unit and had some impact on the situation. There was a quote by some senior officer who comes to mind that one operator, which is what we were called, was worth a company of soldiers on the ground.
Which is how many?
120, something like that.
Every day, the men and women of the Det risked their lives operating undercover in the heart of Republican strongholds. In Derry, the IRA tried to hijack an operator's car, not knowing who he was or that his partner was close behind.
I was the lead car of two, and as we drove around the back of the Rossville flats, I was hijacked.
Jim joined the Det in the late 70s and became one of its most experienced operators. He's lucky to be alive.
What happened?
They had a system then of hijacking cars to use in bombings, and they assumed I was a prime target for hijack, a relatively young single bloke in a car on my own. Two gunmen emerged from the corner of a street and flagged me down, stopped me, drew their guns and tried to get me out of the car. And unfortunately the gunman that day took on the wrong people.
Jim's partner in the following car saw what was happening.
What does your colleague do behind you?
He got out of his car and fired two shots at each of the two gunmen. He missed one, hit the other in the leg, and the one on the left-hand side ran away who hadn't been hit, and the one that hit in the leg went down on the pavement. The guy who'd been hit in the leg was still a threat to me. He still had the gun in his hand, and so I shot him 4 times through the chest.
But why do you kill him if he's already on the ground and wounded?
He had a gun in his hand. He was still a threat.
Kick the gun away from him? Take the gun away from him?
It wasn't as simple as that.
Shoot him in the arm? Why kill him?
It wasn't as simple as that, no. It was a case of he had to go down.
In such a savage conflict, no love was lost between soldiers and the IRA. But sometimes innocent civilians were victims too. In this graveyard in the village of Dunloy, an SAS operation ended in tragedy. A 16-year-old Catholic schoolboy, John Boyle, was looking at an old family grave when he stumbled upon an IRA arms cache. He immediately ran home and told his father.
He said he had been in the graveyard and he had discovered under the fallen tombstone what to him looked like bomb material, a conglomeration of stuff packed onto the headstone.
John's father then rang the police. For a Catholic in a fiercely Republican area, to do so in support of law and order took considerable courage.
I didn't want to see any policeman shot, and I did fear that rather than for any other purpose that it would be used against police. I knew the police and knew them well enough and didn't want that to happen, and that prompted me to send them the word.
The police said they would be in touch, but no word came that evening. The following morning, Con Boyle heard shots and rushed to the graveyard. The SAS had shot his son dead.
I came down here, and as soon as I got out of the car, the two men came out from behind these pillars with rifles and arrested me.
Two soldiers?
Two soldiers, yes. And at that time we didn't see John, and they made reference to John being lying in there.
What did they say?
They said that the other bastard was lying in there dead.
That's what they said?
As they said, yes.
John had returned to the graveyard, probably just to check if his find was still there.
Where were the soldiers?
This is where they were supposed to be.
What, just here?
Just there, yes.
As close as that?
As close as that. I think about 7 yards, 6, 7 meters.
And what happened? What is said to have
happened? The soldier said happened was that John came in here and made towards the gravestone. And their orders was to arrest whoever would come.
The two SAS men were tried for murder. They said they believed their lives were in danger when John picked up a rifle from the cache and turned towards them. The judge acquitted them, but said that one SAS soldier was an untrustworthy witness. Did you have any apology from the SAS or apology from the army?
No, none at all, never a word.
Nobody said sorry?
No.
Even though you told the police about it, nobody said?
No, nobody ever said to me I'd done a good job. I'd done the right thing.
The tragic death in the village graveyard convinced nationalists that the Brits were operating a shoot-to-kill policy, with the SAS pulling the trigger. What was your view of the SAS?
Well, it would have been easy to have arrested John. It should have been easy to have arrested John. I didn't do it. And I didn't think much about them at the time, but as time went on and you watched what was happening around, the SAS didn't arrest very many.
In Dunloy, the killing of John Boyle hardened support for the IRA. On a later occasion, there was intelligence that the IRA was about to mount an operation. The Det had bugged one of the IRA's weapons and placed a house under surveillance. Frank and his partner Paul had moved in to watch from a building site opposite the newly built house.
We were wearing just civilian clothes, so that if we were seen, people would think we were nicking lead or bricks or whatever. Acting the part of just yobbos, basically. We could see the house and we could see what was going on. We were expecting certain cars to come and go to the house, and we wanted to see which cars were associated with the house and various people.
But what the Det did not know was that the IRA suspected they were under surveillance and had sent out 2 of its members to scout the area.
Out of the blue, or out of the black, then came this shout of, what the hell are you doing, effing and blinding. They were obviously very agitated. But all they did was make us stand up with our hands in the air, like cowboys, standing with our hands in the air and still screaming and shouting at us. We just looked into each other's eyes and nodded. At a time which was obviously right, we drew our concealed pistols. You aim for the centre of the observed mass, which in this case is, the torso of a man, because he's trying to do the same to you. And you fire as many rounds as you can and get him down, which is what we did. But the guy with the submachine gun, he was hit, and as he went down, he fired, I think it was 13 rounds. I used to think it was unlucky 13. 3 of the rounds hit me, 1 through my knee, 1 through my thigh, and 1 through my back. The other 4 or 5 rounds that he fired hit Paul high in the chest. And I think he was probably killed immediately.
But the 2 IRA men were still alive.
And then I could hear the two, Hogan and Martin, they went dead. They weren't exactly talking, but they were making a noise. So I think I'd still got some rounds left in my Browning, so I fired a couple more rounds into them.
Frank radioed the Det backup team that was only a few minutes away.
And then the car team arrived. The guys arrived, and they came forward. I indicated to them, two terrorists to the front. They could have still been capable of putting rounds down.
So they finished them off?
So the guys came in and you know, put rounds into them.
Finished them off?
It's, you know, you win the firefight, and that's it.
But they're wounded, they could have been arrested, couldn't they?
Yeah, but you don't know that, do you? Far better for them to be dead than us.
Martin's parents didn't know he'd joined the IRA. Hogan was from a staunch Republican family. At the funeral, Gerry Adams said they were freedom fighters murdered by a British terror gang. Controversy dogged the regular army too, in particular the part-time soldiers of the Ulster Defence Regiment, the UDR. The vast majority were Protestants. As violence increased, some decided to disregard the constraints of the law. Several were convicted of murder and other serious crimes. They'd been hand in glove with the loyalist paramilitaries. Republicans cried collusion, claiming it was sanctioned by the state.
There were quite a number who, no doubt, did pass information and indeed some weapons on to the loyalist paramilitaries.
Some were also members of the loyalist?
Some were also members of the loyalist paramilitaries.
At the same time as they were members of the British Army, the UDR?
Yeah.
And that caused you concern?
Yes. It caused everybody concern. It caused the army concern. I mean, well, it wasn't us at Stormont Castle. I mean, it was concern to everybody.
And there were elements in the RUC too who had dual membership. There were policemen who were also members of the UEF.
There were a lot of funny people all over the place. There's no doubt about that at all. Some were known and some were not known. And some were weeded out and some were not weeded out.
Most policemen and UDR soldiers who took the law into their own hands lived in country areas where they were seen as soft targets by the IRA. William McCaughey joined the RUC to defend Ulster, but in frustration he sought to hit back.
It was a combination of a feeling that the state was not responding adequately, and I suppose a perfectly human desire for revenge against those or against that community which had killed my friends.
McCaughey was also a member of the loyalist paramilitary group, the UVF. In this guise, he took his revenge. The target was a Catholic who ran a corner shop in the village of Ahohill. The assassins knocked at his door in the middle of the night and gunned him down. The RUC said the victim was a law-abiding citizen. McCaughey thought otherwise.
When you were going to kill the individual concerned, didn't it occur to you that you were a policeman? Didn't you say to yourself, what am I doing here, a member of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, going out to kill somebody?
No, to be perfectly honest, the fact that I was a member of the RUC didn't enter my mind at all. I went there as an Ulster Loyalist in defence of the state of Northern Ireland. That was my only consideration and motivation.
McCaughey was a member of a 30-strong special police unit based in Armagh. He wasn't the only one involved in terrorist activity.
How many members of the unit were arrested? How many of the 30, roughly?
I think there was 10 arrested and 6 charged.
And how many found guilty?
6.
Of serious crime?
Yeah.
From murder to bombing to kidnapping?
Yes.
Didn't the conviction of Sergeant William McCaughey and half a dozen of his police colleagues indicate that there was collusion between the police and the loyalist paramilitaries in the late 70s?
Well, you see, again, in terms of allegations of collusion, the allegation is that this is systemic, that this is organisation.
But in the case of Sergeant McCaughey, he was a policeman, he was a member of the UVF, he was convicted of murder.
I think you have to look at how the activities of such people are investigated. Is there any tolerance of that, or is there absolute rigorous intolerance? And I think the latter applies so far as the RUC is concerned. Wherever it has had such people, it has acted rigorously to root them out and bring them to justice.
McCaughey served a life sentence for murder inside the Maze prison. Here, like all Loyalist and Republican inmates, he was treated as a common criminal. Government policy had changed. Since the early 70s, all prisoners had enjoyed a special status, which, to their minds, recognised they were prisoners of war. But before McCaughey was sentenced, the status was abolished, and the government insisted that all prisoners were criminals. During his time in jail, McCaughey found the Lord and repented of what he had done. But he still maintained that he'd been defending Ulster, and therefore wasn't a criminal.
These were criminal activities, not merely by the IRA, but also increasingly by the Loyalists. And they should have been dealt with under the criminal law. It's the whole basis of a democracy. You can't have any other basis other than locking people up by due legal process.
But the IRA argued that they weren't criminals, that they were fighting a political war to get the British out of Northern Ireland. They resented being called criminals.
Well, I'm afraid I don't agree with that, and I never have agreed with that.
The government refused to give in. To do so would have left its new policy in ruins. IRA prisoners then escalated their protest with the weapon of last resort, the hunger strike. 7 IRA prisoners refused food for weeks on end. Whitehall officials faced a dreadful dilemma.
First of all, force feeding was out. Therefore, if the hunger strike continued, these people would die. Therefore, we would have more martyrs. And Northern Ireland is not a place to grow martyrs if you can avoid it. Therefore, we were very anxious to try to find some way of enabling the hunger strikers to get off their hook.
If a compromise were to be found, it would have to be devised in the utmost secrecy. In public, the Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, was adamant that there would be no concessions. In private, things were once again moving behind the scenes. The mover was the MI6 officer Michael Oatley, who'd helped negotiate the IRA ceasefire 5 years earlier. He re-emerged from the shadows as several of the prisoners neared death. His link to the IRA was via a friend in Derry. The IRA wanted the issue resolved.
I was rung up by a friend who said, "This is the situation, I think we can do something with it." As usual, the telephone call came at 1 or 2 in the morning. We spent 2 or 3 hours discussing the situation in veiled language over the telephone. I produced a set of proposals as to how the matter might be managed with a formula, and went the following morning with it to the Northern Ireland office.
I got the authority of ministers to proceed with this course of action. Went downstairs, put Michael Oatley in my car. He was driven at speed to London Airport, put on the shuttle to Belfast, and met at the other end, all within the space of a very few hours. And it was accomplished.
Did you clear it with the Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher?
Yes.
And what did she say?
She approved.
Death was now close. The leader, Brendan Hughes, seen here, had gone without food for over 50 days.
The priest was asked to go to Belfast International Airport, I believe, and there he would meet a person with a red carnation. I laughed the night the priest told me this, sitting in the prison, and the priest duly went to the airport, and lo and behold, this guy with a red carnation passed by and passed the document over to Father Brendan.
Oatley had brought revised prison rules, which, to the IRA, were capable of liberal interpretation.
I sincerely believed, but it was a status that we could work with, and we could end this thing. I believed that then, yeah.
Remarkably, Oatley seemed to have ended the hunger strike without loss of face. The prisoners' clothes arrived at the maze, but would they be allowed to put them on? The climax of the epic confrontation was still to come. One of the prisoners' most vociferous champions was Bernadette McCalliskey, still known to many as Bernadette Devlin. What happened to her raised even more questions about the SAS.
And if Britain lets one man or woman die in those prisons, she may well fan the same spark that burns today, and has burned ever since in this country, into one more flame of resistance that will free 32 counties and build a country we can all live in.
At this critical time, Bernadette McCalliskey was top of the Loyalists' hate list.
What did she represent to you as a person?
Detestable bit.
What did you set out to do?
To take her out, to kill her.
this loyalist was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder. He asked us to conceal his identity. Bernadette McAlliskey lived with her husband Michael and their children in a remote bungalow outside Dungannon. The Loyalist hit squad planned to bring down the telephone line that was their only contact with the outside world. The attack came at breakfast time.
We drove for about 45 minutes to a place where she lived. It was a very bad morning. Snow, sleet, rain, very dark. Got to the house, two of us went into the house, and the driver stayed outside. His job was to pull the telephone wires down. We went in to the house. That's what we had to do in the house.
How did you get into the house?
We had a sledge, but it wasn't used. The door was kicked in.
Did you shoot?
I did, yeah.
How many shots?
5.
At whom?
At both.
Did you hit them?
Yeah.
Did you think you killed them?
Yeah, I did.
What the Loyalist UFF did not know was that there was intelligence on the attack and the SAS had been deployed to the scene.
When we come out, the first thing I heard was shouts. British security forces dropped their arms.
With the shooting and the arrest over, the Army's Quick Reaction Force was helicoptered in to deal with the fallout. One of its members now reveals what the SAS told him when he first arrived on the ground.
He said, "Bernadette Devlin's been shot." To which I replied, "Yes, and I'm the Pope in Rome." Obviously, not that I didn't believe it. It was just something that, you know, to get that name branded at you, I'm just going to have an helicopter. And it turned out that she had. So we went as quick as we could round to the house. I think we went in through the kitchen door. And lo and behold, her and her husband, Michael McAlliskey, had also been shot. So we give first aid as much as we could.
The question that immediately sprang to mind was why the SAS hadn't shot or arrested the Loyalists before the deed was done. Why didn't the soldiers stop you? Why didn't they apprehend you before you kicked the door down?
I couldn't answer that.
Because if they had seen you going in, they would have seen you presumably carrying weapons? You'd have expected
if they saw us, they must have saw the weapons.
You would have expected them to have intervened and stopped you?
I suppose so, but you would need to ask them.
So why had the Loyalist killers been allowed to bring down the telephone line and smash in the door without being stopped? It was what the corporal asked the SAS.
I said, "Well, how come you didn't get them on the way in?" Of which there was a pause, and he said, "We must have been looking the other way," which did for me. It was a one-out throwaway line as far as I was concerned, and I just went about my business.
The McAlliskys were given first aid by the corporal and then flown to Belfast for emergency surgery. Miraculously, they both survived, but the mystery of why the SAS hadn't intercepted the Loyalists remained unresolved.
Obviously, it was the talk of the town. The more we talked about it, the more we thought, you know, surely they would have got them on the way in. Remains unanswered, as far as I was concerned.
What do you think happened?
Personally, my personal view is that they allowed them in to do the deed and then stop them on the way out.
Meanwhile, the continuing drama inside the maze was about to reach its climax. The prisoners were never given their own clothes and felt duped by the Brits. A second hunger strike began, now led by their commanding officer, Bobby Sands. Sands died after 66 days on hunger strike. 100,000 mourners followed his coffin. What made his death even more significant was that he'd just been elected a Westminster MP. Others were to follow in his wake. This time there'd been no Michael Oakley to intervene. By now he was out of the country. Attitudes on both sides had hardened, and Mrs. Thatcher refused to give in. 9 more Republican prisoners were to follow Sands to his grave. With the first hunger strike resolved, the second should never have happened. Did you think that 10 men would die?
That was what we were fearful of when we dealt with the first hunger strike. Yes, we did believe that they had the resolution to go through with this and that men would die. That was why we tried to avert it and did so on the first hunger strike. But having averted it once, I can well see that there was very, very little that anybody could do to avert it the second time. There was no room for compromise then. None was sought.
Wouldn't it have been worth just giving them their own clothes? To save 10 lives, to save the political gains that Sinn Féin got from the hunger strike, all that?
Oh, probably, yes, yes. But once these situations arise in which the stakes are raised on both sides, it becomes very difficult.
The IRA had raised the stakes on the military front too, even before the hunger strike. They'd ambushed an army convoy at Warren Point with 2 huge remote-control bombs. The first was hidden in a hay lorry. A paratrooper saw it explode.
I'm actually watching as it happens, and then the hay lorry and the second truck just disappeared together. Big explosion. The truck went up about 100 feet in the air and came down on the central reservation.
18 soldiers were killed.
It was arguably, I think, the most successful and certainly one of the best planned IRA attacks of the whole campaign. We'd always said that one of these days there will be a spectacular. It was almost inevitable that at some stage or other they were going to succeed because we'd failed to interdict them.
The IRA had dealt the British a double blow that day. In the Irish Republic a few hours before, it had killed Lord Mountbatten with another remote-control bomb. The Prime Minister wanted to know what had gone wrong. Why was there no intelligence? Who was to blame? An inquest was held, and the government appointed a former head of MI6 to sort out the intelligence mess. It could not be allowed to happen again.
The intelligence gathering of the RUC and of the army was not, I suspect, effectively shared. That is my suspicion, but I think it's probably a well-founded suspicion that it was not effectively shared.
In what sense?
They weren't talking to each other when they should have been talking to each other.
But that's astonishing, isn't it? That here you have 2 organisations united in what one assumes to be the defeat of terrorism, and yet they're not talking to each other.
Well, that was the problem.
By the early 80s, the rivalries appeared to have been sorted out. With the police now in control, operations were directed from this office, the Tasking and Coordinating Group, or TCG. It's never been filmed before. From here, all the intelligence agencies, Army, Police and MI5, monitor operations on the ground and act accordingly.
I think they were tremendously effective. These were organisations into which all intelligence should flow, whether that be from human agents, whether it be intelligence technically gained, or whether it be information gleaned simply from members of the public phoning in, or from officers who are out and about their normal duties.
Among the TCG's resources are 2 offensive arms. One is the SAS, the other the HMSU, the Headquarters Mobile Support Unit, the RUC's anti-terrorist squad trained by the SAS. Like the SAS, this special police unit became the focus of intense controversy. At the end of 1982, the police unit shot dead 3 IRA men and 2 members of the INLA. None of them was armed. Republicans accused the RUC of operating a shoot-to-kill policy. The fact that police officers were tried for murder and acquitted simply convinced Republicans that there was a cover-up.
It is named that Parr has now given the licence to kill through the newly formed shoot-to-kill assassination squad of the RUC.
The officer appointed to investigate these sensitive killings was John Stalker, the Deputy Chief Constable of Greater Manchester. There was widespread outrage when it was revealed that officers from the Special Police Unit had not told the truth.
What made
the Stalker case is even more controversial was the evidence that the police tried to cover up what they had done. They told cover stories, they told lies, and that simply confirmed people's suspicions that there was a shoot-to-kill policy and the whole thing was operating illegally.
I think that did give rise to those perceptions, undoubtedly. That's the case. I think the motivation for those cover stories was the protection of methodology, the protection of informants who had originally given intelligence, and I think the intention was to create a perception that these police officers just happened to be in the places they were.
Which they weren't.
Which they weren't. They were there on a planned basis. They were there on the basis of intelligence.
Stalker penetrated the darkest corners of the secret war when he investigated the dramatic events that took place at this hayshed. Special Branch had established that the IRA had hidden a huge quantity of explosives inside, and MI5 had planted a listening device to keep track of them. But the device failed to work. The explosives vanished. The result, a huge crater a few miles away, 15 feet deep and 40 feet wide. The explosives had been used to ambush a police car. The 3 officers inside were killed. Had MI5's bug been working, the tragedy wouldn't have happened. MI5 then planted a second device in case the IRA returned. When the device picked up voices, the Special Police Unit moved in and shot dead 17-year-old Michael Tighe. He'd no IRA connections. His friend Martin Macaulay was wounded. Inside were 3 old rifles without ammunition. The police said they'd shouted a warning. Macaulay told a different story.
We looked at the barn, the window was open. Went over to the window, there was metal objects. We climbed in to have a look. Within a few minutes, Michael Tighe, there was 2 shots rang out, Michael Tighe was killed instantly. I seen a guy with a rifle moving across the door. Once he had disappeared, the whole place exploded in gunfire. I moved to get cover to the opposite side of the door, and in doing that I was hit.
But it should have been possible to find out whether a warning had been given. MI5's second device had been working at the time of the shooting, and the tape of it ought to have resolved the contradiction. Stalker discovered that MI5 had made 42 tapes of the hayshed. He concluded that the last tape, tape 42, must have recorded the shooting and therefore could resolve the question once and for all. For months he fought to obtain the master tape and was constantly thwarted. He was eventually told it no longer existed. It transpires that the vital tape, the security service tape that recorded the actual shooting at the hayshed, disappears and is destroyed.
Well, I mean, I have no personal knowledge of that, but clearly...
Well, you know the tape disappeared.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I mean, that was very much the focus of John Stalker's investigation. And of course these things, of course they give rise to the gravest suspicions in the minds of people as to what lay behind those sorts of things.
Although the master tape, tape 42, had been destroyed, what John Stalker did not know was that a cassette copy of it had been secretly made by one of those monitoring the hayshed at the time as a macabre personal souvenir. When MI5 found out, it ordered the cassette copy to be handed over to it, and it remained locked away in MI5 safekeeping for some years, until, that is, John Stalker appeared on the scene. Around that time, a senior MI5 officer in the province ordered one of his MI5 colleagues to destroy the priceless cassette copy. As a result, the vital remaining evidence as to whether police officers did issue a warning before opening fire was removed. Did you know that a copy of that tape had been made?
No.
And did you find out that a copy, once it had been made, had been destroyed by the security service?
Only when I heard about it from the report. I didn't know about these things in advance.
Colin Sampson, the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, completed Stalker's inquiry. We have discovered that, controversially, his report recommended that MI5 officers should be prosecuted for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. The great majority of those who heard the tape heard no warning. And when you read in Mr. Sampson's report that the copy of the tape had been destroyed by the security service, what was your reaction?
That this, if true, was most unfortunate.
The Attorney General of the day was Sir Patrick Mayhew. Although he was told that there was sufficient evidence for prosecutions, a political decision was made that they would not be in the public interest. The last thing the government wanted to see was MI5 officers in the dock charged with destroying vital evidence. It would have been political dynamite, and the consequences for MI5 would have been seismic.
What I had in mind was that criminal proceedings would be used under the procedures of the court to elicit a lot of material of vital importance to the intelligence services, and that this would be enormously damaging.
It would also have been extremely embarrassing if security service officers had been in court charged with destroying the vital evidence that John Stalker had been looking for.
Yes, indeed.
The copy of the tape.
Yes, yes. Mm.
The additional reason why prosecutions would have been so sensitive is that some of those against whom prosecutions would have been brought were serving members of the security service MI5. That was the additional sensitivity, wasn't it?
Well, I think I've said what I said to the House of Commons, which represented the truth, that a lot of intelligence matters would have been brought out, and that would have been very deleterious to the intelligence operation that was essential in the circumstances of the time.
Were you in favour of prosecuting?
I think I saw it as a finely balanced case. I don't think I don't want to go further than that.
The problem, of course, was by declaring that there would be no prosecutions in the public interest, people simply said, well, what did we tell you all along? It was a cover-up.
Yeah.
If the political bombshell ticking away in the hayshed had exploded in court, it might have jeopardised not only MI5's methodology, but MI5 itself. Covert operations were thereby preserved. All soldiers and policemen are legally bound by the yellow card, which allows them to open fire only when their lives are threatened. But there are no unbiased witnesses to an armed confrontation. In the heat of battle, legal niceties may not always be observed.
There is not a shoot-to-kill policy.
Anna joined the Det in the 1980s and took part in many covert operations against the IRA.
All I can say is that on every briefing it was the yellow card and that arrest, and obviously if arms are brought to bear that you would open fire if you believed your life or somebody else's life was in danger.
Wasn't there a nod and a wink on the yellow card?
None at all. Nothing like that at all. They're professionals. They're professional soldiers, not cowboys.
But however precise the orders to arrest, no Republican will ever believe that there was not a shoot-to-kill policy. They simply point to their graves. The Brits shed few tears for their victims, knowing that few would be shed for them.
This government will never surrender to the IRA, never!
These people will never win. Democracy will triumph over evil.
The intelligence we gathered for that job from Special Branch was that two notorious players would be involved in a murder, an assassination.
Mary belonged to the Army's secret undercover unit, 14 Intelligence Company, the eyes and ears of the SAS, the troop in Army language.
I drove the troop in, 5 of them, in the back of a van, unmarked van, and basically I would take them in, drop them off.
14 Intelligence Company, the secret Army unit known as the Det, were monitoring 3 AK-47s at a farm building in County Armagh. There was intelligence that 2 of the IRA's most wanted men, Martin McCaughey and Desi Grew, were coming to pick them up that night. The SAS were waiting.
It was a quiet night, dark, very, very quiet and still, and the next thing was this thunderous roar of 7.62 fire going down. And it's very loud. You feel the jolt. It's not like watching it on TV when you just see like a crack or a bang. This is like a kaboom. Several of them, shattering the quietness of the night.
Mr. McCaughey and Mr. Grew wouldn't have stood much of a chance, would they?
They walked out of that barn carrying AK-47s, walking in the direction of the troop guys. At the end of the day, they were terrorists on a mission. They chose that. And they met their maker.
This programme reveals how British intelligence tightened the net around the IRA and helped draw them into negotiations.
The real war in Northern Ireland was the intelligence war. I mean, this was the main factor in reducing the IRA or preventing all of the atrocities that may have taken place. It was all down to the gathering of intelligence by the Det and other agencies.
In the mid-80s, the IRA intensified its campaign in the countryside, hoping to create liberated zones, no-go areas for the army and the police. They bombed police stations in East Tyrone and killed workmen who were sent to repair them. When they destroyed the Birches station, the bomb was in a JCB. Ballygawley suffered the same fate, with the IRA shooting dead 2 policemen inside. The IRA was brimful of confidence. The next target was the picturesque village of Loughgall, but this time British intelligence knew. The information came from a listening device, Det surveillance, and, we understand, a special branch informer within the IRA unit. 7 SAS troopers and 3 special branch officers acted as decoys.
Well, I volunteered to go into Loughgall station. They asked for volunteers from our unit to go into the station for a period of time, and I said yes, I would.
John joined the RUC Special Branch and became a member of its anti-terrorist unit. We've concealed the identities of undercover agents in this series to protect their security.
We went in on the night, the Thursday evening, just as darkness approached. We entered the station, along with our army colleagues.
The SAS?
The SAS, yes. And we set up base at the station, got ourselves settled, and then waited out for further instructions.
Where were you?
We were probably about 3 or 4 miles out of Loughgall on the back roads, just as all the Det were, just driving around, trying to pick up and give people an early warning as to what was happening.
Anna joined 14 intelligence company, the Det, in the 80s.
And what did you see?
I saw the van, we saw the JCB, and initially we thought it had been stuck behind a slow-moving vehicle.
Loughgall was a carbon copy of the Birches, a bomb in the bucket of a JCB. Its job was to smash through the station's flimsy defence. What goes through your mind when you see this JCB coming towards you?
Bomb. I just thought of the Birches again, Ballygawley, and I'm sitting right outside the window of the police station. I heard gunfire. I took cover, and within seconds, a massive explosion. I found myself buried at the corner of the station, in rubble, inhaling dust, and in darkness.
Did you think you were going to survive?
No. At that stage, I thought, I'm dead. Simple as that. I thought I was dead.
And what's going through your head as you're listening to all this gunfire?
For me and my partner, we were just very quiet. We were just wondering what had happened, who had been killed, if we'd lost friends.
Outside, the SAS were lying in wait, heavily outnumbering and outgunning the IRA's 8 men. The SAS fired over 200 shots. One of them killed the special branch informer who was part of the unit. The van was riddled like a sieve. And there were 8 dead IRA men.
That's correct. It's a tragedy, but rather than 3 dead policemen, I think it's a better option.
And when you heard that there were 8 IRA men dead?
I think that we could say that we were jubilant again. I was amazed that 8 had actually been killed. But yeah, we were happy. We thought it was a job well done.
My personal first reaction was really one of some satisfaction that we had won one, as it were, in this continual conflict, that it was a victory for the forces of law and order.
What message did Loch Gall and similar incidents send to the IRA?
I hope it sent a message that the British government was resolute and was going to fight them.
It was the IRA's biggest loss in modern times. Among the dead were some of its most experienced and ruthless men. Republicans accused the Brits of murder, claiming the IRA unit need not have been mowed down in cold blood.
Why wasn't the IRA unit intercepted?
Well, my understanding is that the intelligence was not precise enough for people to know where these people were coming from, precisely who they were, and exactly when the attack would take place. And as it happened, the events unfolded with such rapidity, it clearly wasn't possible to intercept them before they embarked upon their attack.
Why weren't they arrested?
Well, again, these are people who attacked with such ferocity. They demolished the police station. They opened fire with a whole variety of weapons. So clearly it wasn't possible to arrest them in those circumstances through the circumstances that they had brought about.
A few hundred yards from the police station, there was a white car. Two brothers were inside. They were innocent civilians caught up in the IRA attack and SAS ambush. How many times were you hit?
12 times to the back and a couple of times in the head.
In the head?
Uh-huh.
Whereabouts in the head?
The left-hand side of it, on the back.
His brother Anthony was killed outright. The SAS fired 40 shots into the car.
Do you remember your brother saying anything?
Well, he gave a bit of a shout, Oliver, help me. Those were the last few words he said.
Well, this is an absolutely unspeakable tragedy. But I have no doubt that that was brought about by a gang of people determined to engage in murder, determined to carry out a gun attack and a bomb attack.
The SAS did the shooting, not the IRA. They killed Anthony Hughes.
This is an absolutely unspeakable tragedy, and there's no words that can dilute that. But I have no doubt where the responsibility and where the blame lies.
The SAS thought it was an IRA car. It wasn't. The brothers were just returning home from work.
When you look back on what happened, how do you think of that night?
Well, I think it was very unjust, because they could have had a checkpoint and stopped us from going into that area. Told us there's danger about to take place.
But there was no checkpoint?
No.
I don't know how that would have been possible, because the time scale wasn't known. I don't know how you could have brought the village life to a stop, not having detailed information at disposal.
But wasn't the real reason why there was no cordon around the village is that a cordon would have alerted the IRA to the fact that something was afoot, that their plans were known?
No, I'm certain that that isn't the case. I'm certain that had intelligence, had information been precise, then the planning could have been much more precise.
Did anybody ever say sorry?
No.
Ministry of Defence?
No.
SAS?
No.
British Army?
No.
RUC?
No.
No apology?
No. No apology.
Informants remain the lifeblood of intelligence, and the army, as well as Special Branch, recruits and runs them. The handlers belong to the Force Research Unit, the FRU. It's so secret, it doesn't officially exist. Its motto, Fishers of Men, says it all. As much as anything, its fishers need nerve.
You physically walk up to them.
And say?
And say, I want a word with you. Or hello, use his name. And say something like, I'm from British Intelligence, I want 20 seconds of your time. Don't panic, don't run away. And hope that he stands still. If he doesn't, physically hold him. It wouldn't be the first time I was left with a duffel coat in my hands from one of them just taking off.
Jeff joined the FRU in the mid-80s and handled both IRA and Loyalist agents. One of the agents he ran became notorious, a former British soldier from Belfast called Brian Nelson. By the early 70s, Nelson had left the army and joined the loyalist paramilitaries of the UDA. In 1983, he offered his services to the FRU, but, disillusioned, left after a year and went to live in Germany. In 1986, the FRU brought him back, against the specific advice of MI5. Jeff became Brian Nelson's handler.
We had set him up in that job. We had went to Germany, recruited him, promised him a house, had paid the deposit on a house, brought him and his family back into this dangerous job. He arrived with a left-hand drive vehicle, which was totally unsuitable. He was given the deposit for another car and set up in a taxi firm.
Were you involved in that rehabilitation here?
Yes.
Astonishingly, Nelson rapidly rose to become the UDA's intelligence chief. In theory, his job was to alert his handlers about the UDA's latest target. They, in turn, would inform the tasking and coordinating group, the TCG. The TCG operates from this office and consists of representatives from the agencies of British intelligence. They decide what action should be taken to thwart terrorist operations and thus save life. But it didn't always work out like that. Nelson didn't tell his handlers everything, and even when he did, their superiors didn't always act. Nelson gave the killers cards containing personal details of dozens of Republican suspects. He compiled them with the help of his handlers. Jeff now admits that his secret army unit actually aided and abetted in murder.
On occasion, would you give him the kind of information he was looking for?
No, but I would say to him, perhaps you don't have that wrong there.
But if you confirm the vehicle registration, and if the person who owns that car is targeted by the UDA, UFF, and killed, then you're complicit in the killing of that person, aren't you? Because you've confirmed the registration number. That's the real difficulty.
Well, it's a fine line you walk.
But the secret unit didn't stop Nelson crossing that line. He's believed to have been involved in over a dozen killings. In the end, he pleaded guilty to 5 charges of conspiracy to murder. 3 of those targeted survived. 1 was killed by mistake, and 1 was attacked in the middle of the night. His name was Gerard Slane. Nelson had supplied his photograph and file card to the killers. In the end, things got too hot for both Nelson and the FRU. He was exposed as a British agent. The judge sentenced him to 10 years for his part in planning murders. At his trial, the FRU's commanding officer paid tribute to Nelson's work. Jeff was of the same view.
He saved, in my estimation, dozens of lives. He was essential to what I'll use the word the war effort, and gave us an insight into the loyalist organisations that we never ever had in the past, and I believe don't now. He was a jewel in the crown.
But to Republicans, Brian Nelson was living proof of collusion, the instrument used by British intelligence to wipe out its enemies. The fact that Nelson usually tipped off his handlers cut no ice.
Brian Nelson went to jail because he was involved in conspiracies to murder.
Yes, at our behest.
He was encouraged to be involved in those conspiracies.
Yes, he was.
By you and your colleagues.
Yes, he was.
By the FRU.
Yes.
By British intelligence.
Yes.
Served their purpose.
Yes.
And he went to jail.
Yes. I am ashamed of it. He wasn't protected as was promised to him. Brian believed not that he was bulletproof, but that he had protection from us, and that what he was doing at our request, and therefore he had immunity, and he didn't.
British intelligence relied not just on agents, but on blanket surveillance, in particular in the border areas of South Armagh. Here, in the IRA's most impenetrable stronghold, the debt couldn't mingle with the locals with the freedom it did elsewhere. In order to watch their movements, increasingly sophisticated technology took over, not just from the air, but also on the ground.
Did you monitor IRA suspects on the other side of the border?
Yes, we did. One particular one, yes. Which we were watching him for some 2 years.
2 years?
2 years.
Ken served with the Det for a number of years. His speciality was high-tech surveillance.
And what could you see?
You could see... Well, we could read his number plate on his car, let's put it that way. Using a large lens, we could look into this character's house. We would watch him morning, noon, night. We could see, even in pitch black, we could see what he was actually doing. Daytime, in colour, we could see what he's having for breakfast, if he's having a cooked breakfast, whether he's having cornflakes, whether he's children ready for school.
Is this a live camera you're trying to put in place?
It is, yes.
Transmitting live pictures?
Live pictures, going back via microwave link to Portadown.
So people in Portadown can sit and watch a senior IRA suspect going about his business?
His day-to-day business, or his not-so-day-to-day business.
However covert the techniques, there were few the IRA did not know about. Cameras were found in fields, bugs in houses, and tracking devices in cars. But most remained in place, transmitting vital intelligence on the IRA. The effect was devastating. What did the technology enable British intelligence to do?
Effectively, I think, to bring the IRA to a standstill where it could move very, very little. I think that's what the technology done. That's what the intelligence services were able to do. I think they were able to effectively stop the IRA. I'm not saying defeat the IRA, but certainly effectively to stop it.
Contain them?
To contain it, yeah.
By the early 90s, British intelligence had dealt the IRA a series of crushing blows. The policy of attrition and containment was paying off. The IRA's leadership knew it now had a choice, to carry on killing and dying, or talk.
Why did the IRA decide to talk?
I think for a whole range of reasons. I think in terms of those who headed the Republican movement, there was a realisation that if they cannot be defeated by military means alone, then neither can they win by military means alone.
I think prominent IRA people came to the conclusion that the British military regime could not be defeated, though there had to be negotiations, and that was the only way through it.
Did the operations of the police and the army, in particular the covert units of both, force the IRA down that road?
I think undoubtedly that was a factor in the equation. It wasn't the only factor, but I think it was a very important factor.
There were many reasons why the IRA finally decided to come to the negotiating table, although there's no doubt that the undercover operations of British intelligence did play a powerful part in that process. But what must not be forgotten is that after the hunger strike and the election of its leader, Bobby Sands, to Westminster, the IRA intended to go down that road anyway, through its political wing, Sinn Féin.
The conclusion we came to was that terrorism would end when the terrorists decide to end it. That meant trying to show to the terrorists that their existing policy of, as Gerry Adams put it, the Armalite in the ballot box was mistaken, and that the Armalite should be put on one side, and if the terrorists wanted to make progress, they could not make progress through a terrorist campaign, but Republicans could make progress through using the political process. And that was the essence of the emerging strategy at the end of the 80s.
By early 1991, the pieces were beginning to fall into place. Putting them together involved the government in the most sensitive operation of all, communicating with the IRA. It was done in the utmost secrecy. The ground was laid by the MI6 officer Michael Oatley. He'd negotiated the IRA ceasefire in the mid-70s and helped end the first hunger strike. He now re-emerged from the shadows.
It did seem during 1990, 1991 early part that there might be a mood developing within the provisional leadership where a political strategy as an alternative to violence might be something that they would consider pursuing. So Martin McGuinness agreed to meet me in Northern Ireland.
How did Martin McGuinness strike you?
Well, I hadn't met him before, and I was very considerably impressed by his firmness of manner. I thought he was obviously an intelligent interlocutor, rather, in some ways, rather like talking to a middle-ranking British Army officer of one of the tougher regiments like the Paras or the SAS.
Although Oatley had not been authorised to meet McGuinness, he told the government what he had done. MI5 then officially took over. In 1993, the government received a dramatic message, allegedly from McGuinness himself. It said, "The conflict is over, but we need your advice on how to end it."
It had to be taken extremely seriously and certainly not dismissed. Equally, it was important not to fall into a trap if a sensible analysis suggested that there might be one. So it was looked at extremely carefully and explored.
But the secret exchanges ended when the IRA bombed a fish shop on the Protestant Shankill Road. Their target was loyalist paramilitaries thought to be meeting upstairs. They were not. 10 people died in the blast, including one of the bombers. Gerry Adams carried the bomber's coffin. The Prime Minister, John Major, made no secret of his feelings about talking to Adams.
I can only say that would turn my stomach over, and that of most people in this House, and we will not do it.
Yet this was the man with whose organisation the government had been conducting a secret dialogue for over 2 years. Within days of the Shankill bomb, the secret contacts were dramatically revealed. Mayhew faced the press.
Were you nervous?
Oh, of course, because there they all were, slavering for blood. A good opportunity to screw this minister. Here he is on the most tender of all subjects, and it looks as though he's been negotiating when he said he hadn't. Nobody has been authorised to undertake talks or negotiations on behalf of the government with the IRA, with Sinn Féin, with any organisation that undertakes terrorism, undertakes violence for political purposes. Perfectly true, I said we hadn't been negotiating. I never said that there had been no conversation of any sort. And so that was a very difficult time.
After much further bloodletting on both sides, the IRA finally declared a ceasefire. The loyalist paramilitaries soon followed suit. But the government was not convinced that the IRA was sincere and demanded assurances that its ceasefire was permanent. The Brits were not going to lower their guard.
Covert operations still had to go ahead.
And what was the IRA doing during its ceasefire?
It was targeting various organisations, people from IUC, opposing organisations, tit-for-tat sectarian targeting, and planning operations for future.
So during the ceasefire you carried on with your operations?
Yes, we did.
The IRA ceasefire held, but the political talks it had been led to believe would follow did not materialise. The rank and file grew impatient, in particular in South Armagh. Increasingly, the IRA felt they'd been duped by the Brits.
There was certainly frustration at grassroots. They saw normality return to the province, and for what they described as for no benefit to the provisional movement. And actually they were rapidly being ignored by the vast majority. And therefore they had to do something to restore their impact, to put pressure on the politicians, to bring them to the negotiating table.
The impact came in the heart of London's docklands, and it was massive. However far-reaching the intelligence umbrella, the Brits were unable to anticipate the IRA's every move.
In a liberal democracy, where terrorists are prepared to flaunt and abuse the freedoms provided in that liberal democracy, then it's not difficult to carry out such attacks. And sadly, perfect protection against such attacks is not possible.
The hopes of the emerging peace process were shattered in a night. Hardly the best start for the new head of the anti-terrorist squad.
At midnight on the Friday, due to start on the Monday, I was in the Docklands looking at £500 million worth of criminal damage, 2 deaths, 70 GBHs, another 300 odd injuries of one kind or another.
And when you're standing there in the debris, about to start the new job, what goes through your mind?
Well, I suppose you wouldn't be human if you didn't ask yourself, gosh, where do I start here, looking at the scale of the devastation?
Grieve and his team then profiled the vehicle that had delivered the bomb. By studying motorway surveillance cameras, they tracked its journey from Carlisle to London. The public was then asked to help.
About the 300th call out of 800 from the public was somebody who said, your bomb truck was parked outside my business on a piece of wasteland, and there is material still here after 3 or 4 days that I think they threw off the vehicle. And out of that we found the clues to the bomb truck's route and eventually to its delivery mechanism.
The breakthrough came from 3 sets of thumbprints, all belonging to the bomber, the triple thumbprint man. But his identity remained a mystery, at least for the time being. With the ceasefire shattered, the Brits faced a renewed IRA campaign. In South Armagh, a single-shot sniper became the soldier's deadly nightmare. He'd already killed 9 members of the security forces. One had been lucky to survive. His helmet took the force of the high-velocity round.
I was actually shot through the helmet, grazing the head. I do remember my neck being taken voluntarily back, as well as my whole body. And one of the things that sticks in mind is the taste. So it's not like carbon tail if it was taste from the round, or taste, from the helmet where the bits had flown off. I can always remember this sort of horrible carbon taste. Not quite the same as a gunpowder taste you would get from a round going off or whatever, but a terrible taste.
What was the psychological impact on soldiers of the sniper?
I think the sniper had quite a major impact. You never knew where it was going to come from. You got virtually no warning. The fact that the sniper was very successful, that if he fired, in the majority of cases you were killed, clearly had an impact.
I think it's the fact that you suddenly realise that somebody is there to kill you. It doesn't sort of hit you when you have shoots before, but with it being a sniper, it's 1-to-1. Well, it's not even 1-to-1. You haven't got the chance that he has. But for somebody to pick you out and say, right, you're the one, you're going to die. That's been the hardest thing, I think.
The 5-foot-long Barrett sniper rifle was mounted in the back of a Mazda and fired from behind a hinged armoured plate. Stephen Restorick was unemployed and desperately wanted a job, so he joined the army.
He was a typical young 23-year-old. He was just so full of life, and he was so outgoing as well. He'd talk to anybody. He knew it was the last thing I wanted him to do, but it was his life, and he just saw it as a good career.
In February 1997, Stephen was manning a checkpoint in the village of Bessbrook in South Armagh. He was checking a woman's driving licence when the sniper squeezed the trigger. And when you heard what had happened?
I think it's the usual reaction of anybody who hears the same thing. It's just total disbelief. Slowly, when the policeman told me, I just said, no, it's not true, it's not true. And, from there you have to make what I would say the hardest journey anyone has to make.
The intelligence agencies had their suspicions as to who the sniper team were. The problem was getting the evidence. Gradually, over long months, 14 intelligence company, the Det, helped build up the picture.
If you can't stand outside your own base without getting hit by a sniper, then it's pretty poor doings. So yes, a lot of effort was put into capturing the sniper teams and finding out who they were.
Covert technical surveillance in such a hostile environment was enormously difficult, and the Det's ingenuity was stretched to the limit.
You would be picking out things at night, in daytime, what you could probably use to disguise the cameras, whether it be an old Wellington boot that lays there, or a rock, a significant rock. You would
rock?
Yeah. You would photograph the rock with infrared, take it back, and try and replicate that rock as best as you can, and replace that rock with another one with a camera hidden in it.
So the camera is hidden inside?
Inside a rock, yeah.
Presumably the operation that you were involved in was replicated
all over the place, all across, to find out exactly who it was, yeah.
So all the suspects were identified?
Identified.
Monitored. Movements known?
Yeah.
Watched? Recorded?
Recorded.
And acted upon?
Yeah, as and when required.
Intelligence pinpointed aboard a farm where the team were preparing a shoot. 4 IRA men were getting their vehicles ready when the SAS swooped and made the arrest. In the search, they found the rifle's lethal ammunition and, in the end, the rifle itself, concealed under the floor of a horse box.
We'd caught them red-handed. We'd struck a blow, the first proper blow probably for 20 years, against South Parra, who'd almost thought they had become invincible. We'd struck right at the heart of their morale and their feeling of invincibility. It was a great feeling for all the members of the army and for the police, because we'd worked a long time to achieve this. We'd lost it for Bombardier Restrick a couple of months before, and we really felt that this was one back for him.
It brought about quite a degree of shock on the part of the IRA to be arrested right in their own backyard, so to speak, where they felt a certain degree of relaxation, to find that here they were arrested and their weapons seized.
The IRA weren't actually holding weapons at the time of the arrest. Unlike previous allegations of shoot to kill, in this case no shots were fired.
Above all, I think the fact that we had arrested them and not shot them,
not killed them,
was, I think, very important as well, because it sent a message that there weren't going to be any martyrs. They'd been caught red-handed. They were going to go down. That they were no longer invincible.
One of those arrested was Seamus McArdle. He wasn't just a member of the sniper team, he was also the elusive triple thumbprint man behind the Docklands bomb. John Greaves' mystery was solved.
I was actually at a rock concert one night, and my pager went off right at the end of it, and it was a message to call my contacts in the RUC urgently, and it was clear even from the pager message that they were very excited about something.
The sniper team was tried and convicted in Belfast and sentenced to long years in prison. The irony is that following the election of Tony Blair, a second IRA ceasefire and the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, the sniper team will soon be released. Such is the price of the hoped-for peace. In Belfast, Rita Restorick was in court to see her son's killers tried and convicted.
Those who were sentenced for the killing of your son, and others too, will be released very shortly under the Good Friday Agreement. How do you feel about that, to see your son's killers go free and the killers of others?
It's very hard, like it is for all the other people who are having to see this happen. But if we could be sure that this route we're taking works and there'd be no more killing, then it's something we have to accept.
At the moment, there's no guarantee that the route will work. For years, the stumbling block to cementing a lasting peace has been the IRA's refusal to hand over or destroy its weapons. That's what the British government and the Ulster Unionists have always demanded. But for the IRA, it's been a step too far. Why is it so illogical to ask the IRA to decommission its arsenal if the IRA is really interested in peace?
Decommissioning is one of these dishonest words, isn't it? Rather like calling the Ministry of War the Ministry of Defence. And decommissioning means hand in your weapons, which is, after all, the traditional the traditional mark of defeat. Defeated armies stack their weapons and walk off into prison camps. And I think it's established in the history of Irish rebellion that this is not something you do. If you decide to end your campaign, you stick your gun somewhere in the roof and continue to lead a peaceful life, but you don't go and hand it in. Any organisation which has support and financial support and chooses violence can get hold of weapons, and token handing over of weapons is really meaningless. It is politically counterproductive.
The restoration of the executive and the return of Martin McGuinness as Minister for Education is reason for optimism. It's happened because the IRA was prepared to open its bunkers for inspection. But the gesture doesn't impress many who've spent their lives putting McGuinness's colleagues behind bars. To them, opening up bunkers isn't the same as giving up guns.
You just cannot have a bunch of terrorists, and I feel probably once a terrorist, always a terrorist, a bunch of terrorists wandering around, and if they get a bit sad and they throw the teddy bear in the corner, they can just go out and get their armour light or their AK-47 and pick up where they left off, be it in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. I feel there cannot be a political solution. Well, as they have been described so many times, the men of violence still have their weapons, their tools of violence.
For now, the peace process is back on track. Hundreds of soldiers are preparing to go home. They believe their job has been done.
What has the army achieved? 600 killed, 6,000 wounded, 30 years of experience. I think what we have achieved is that we've held the line. We've contained terrorism to allow a wider strategic political plan to be developed and implemented. And I think we've done that job pretty well.
If the peace process moves to its conclusion, these soldiers will be the first of many to leave. Much rides on the IRA's statement that it will put its arms completely and verifiably beyond use. We are where we are today because the Brits pursued their own armour light and ballot box strategy, tough security matched by political initiatives. After 30 years, the Brits have not defeated the IRA, but forced it to face political reality.
In the light of the IRA's recent statement, do you believe that the war is over?
That's a very significant statement. It goes further than anything we've heard publicly from them before.
I think it's amazing, and to the credit of all the parties in Northern Ireland, that we've made the progress we have. I think we delude ourselves if we think that the process of healing and of finding a peaceful way forward is yet complete.
What I can say with confidence and optimism is that we'll never go back to the dark days. The public of Northern Ireland won't have to go back to the dark days, and public further afield won't have to go back to the dark days they had to endure for almost 30 years. Maybe too soon to say the war is over. I think we can say the war is ending.